Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. On this show, Robert is back to pick up our journey alongside Oswald Bastable as he navigates the strange world of an alternative 1970s full of airships, anarchists, and a nasty little fucker called Regan. We recorded this a couple of months back, but a combination of sound issues and a heroic dose of lurgy on my part made it a sod to edit, so I've been doing it bit by bit, but it's now here. So leave the bosun in charge of the watch, hit your bunk, take a snifter of something fiery, and join Robert and me as we get into the Warlord of the Air Book 2. We are back in Derry and Tom's, and Robert's with me as we are here to pick up part 2 of the Warlord of the Air. And spoiler, there's probably going to be a part 3. So, yeah, but before we crack on with part 2, we've got some housekeeping to take care of, right? So there's something we really didn't get into in part 1 of our chatting that I've been just thinking about a little bit. That's this utopian vision of the world according to the colonial powers of the 1970s, who were not hamstrung by the world wars and all the surrounding events. And that's what we've been seeing through Bastable's eyes in part 1 of Warlord of the Air. But we, of course, have the benefit of our additional layer of realisation and context that Bastable doesn't have, because we know the alternative history of our world, and we know that in the future, Bastable will witness these alternate futures, well, at least 3 alternative futures. But it's a depressingly enticing thing to many people of the West, particularly in countries like the UK or Great Britain, depending on who you talk to. This idea of the end of empire being the downfall of the nation in many different respects. And I think we've had quite a few comments on this. One, people saying, this was my first Moorcock, much like us, but other people saying, how fucking relevant is this book right now? Yeah. Because these ideas, most of them these days are dominated by right-wing rhetoric, of course, but there are a lot of people out there who are attracted to this romanticised idea that the empire was benevolent, the British Empire was benevolent, and that the great gains of colonial nations as our grip weakened in the aftermath of the wars, inevitably, was all well and good. But somehow these people of the colonial countries have been freed and emancipated at our expense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, really intoxicating for some people. And of course, it gets exploited by the far right. It always has been. Go back to Mosley, even before then, the black shirts before then, well before that. It's as old as the hills, isn't it? You know, see Stuart Lee's Beaker People routine for more information.
Yeah.
But we had a quick chat on the Discord about steampunk, and we touched on it last time out, and this is why it came up on the Discord, because we talked about the imperialist, colonialist tropes of steampunk community in terms of cosplay, one that has a limited amount to do with steampunk fiction, but the cosplay community does seem to attract people who, number one, like dressing up. Number two, they're attracted to the potential worldview that an alternative steampunk version of Victorian Britain, where we still have empire, appeals to them on some kind of level.
Yeah.
And I mentioned last time out as well that some of my best friends are steampunks, and I said that with my tongue in my cheek. But actually, 2 of my best friends are steampunk cosplayers. They don't read steampunk fiction, unless you count Brian Talbot's Nemesis the Warlock, book 2 or 3, whatever it is. But I asked my steampunk friends what their experience was, and they both answered really, really quickly via WhatsApp. Now, I can see you've got a delicious tumbler of something there, and I'm just going to have a slug of this. I've got a lemsip with honey and some wild turkey in it, so it's like a medicated hot toddy.
I have cranberry juice, some regular old water from the tap, and then I spiked it, even though it's the middle of the afternoon here, with this thing which is all the rage now, at least among people I know, a bit of water with a bunch of pot in it.
Oh, interesting. So you get a CBD kick along with your vitamin C.
It's not CBD, it's THC. It's honest to goodness marijuana, which is something that I don't particularly like very much. But I found that the water is very easygoing, particularly if I take a very small amount.
Right. You see, living in the UK, we sometimes forget the relaxation of the marijuana laws in the USA made all sorts of things possible.
Yes,
that we don't have access to.
what's funny now is now that it's legal is that I drive by all these places where I can go in and buy a joint if I want, except that I don't like joints. I never have, and I don't like that jumpy feeling. But I tried the water at the recommendation of a friend who said, sip it and don't drink the whole thing. And I said, yes, yes, okay. And I found that approximately half of the amount she suggested to me was sufficient. More than that was I was loopy.
Oh,
Loopy.
well. Yeah, I think I'd have panic attacks if I took too much THC these days.
Yeah, and as have I. But this is nice. It's relaxing, and I find myself in command of my faculties.
Oh, have you done the have a little bit too much?
I have a little bit too much. I've done it a few times.
Yeah.
But back on the sort of the romanticization of empire. I mean, you can look back to what the '80s, early '80s, when you had the Merchant Ivory put out Heat and Dust with Shashi Kapoor and Julie Christie, and Jewel and the Crown came out around then, right? The Far Pavilions, Staying On, and programs like this. And I think that there's Moorcock taps into it, not just in these books, but he flicks at it in a number of others. This kind of it's the romanticizing of something that is, for all of its sins and evils, carried a great deal of pageantry and taste and refinement. And there is a certain almost morbid glory that I find that he portrays in the kind of people who persist in those dreams, right? There, it's a doomed romance of sorts, which is, let's face it, is kind of cool. Now, but I don't think that he in these books at all pursues any kind of justification of or endorsement of people who would hold empire. You can look at the Hawkmoon books, and he's pretty clear about it there. But I think that he likes, like with Bastable, he likes writing a character who carries those ideals, but then through the school of hard knocks and a number of different time travels, has it all taken away.
Yeah.
But the settings, the clothing, the majesty of the Zeppelins, all that stuff it's cool. I dig it.
It is. You can see why it's appealing, can't you?
It's why I liked watching movies like Luchino Visconti, who made The Damned.
Yeah.
About that family that essentially tears itself apart as the Nazis come to power. And I mean, it's a horrible, it's a pretty shitty situation that these people are in. But this sort of beautiful death of empire with the Mahler music playing and all this sort of thing is it's the same thing that would draw you to certain kinds of goth music. It's the, like, Bela Lugosi's dead or something like that. Like it is kind of dress up in a way.
Yeah, I mean, there's huge overlap between the goth community and the steampunk community now. Steampunk cosplay type people didn't really exist to a great degree, but if you go back 20, 25 years. But in Whitby in North Yorkshire, there's always been there's been a goth festival for a long time. But the goth festival now is more steampunk than goth, because there was such a massive overlap and people started moving across, to the point where there was a huge schism in the steampunk goth community where they all started beefing with each other because the goths felt like they'd been, superseded at their own, weekend, their own festival. It's all very odd.
It sounds like a variation on the Quadrophenia movie.
Yes, yeah, very, just with less entertaining fighting, I guess, and just more bitching.
And no sting.
But when I asked them the direct question, Steampunk Friend 1 said, "The gammon is definitely there in the steampunk community, dude. The cosplay community, probably not so much as that attracts the younger generation. I personally heard racist comments from people in the steampunk community. Steampunks tend to be the older generation with a typical view of the gammon. I was talking to a steampunk chap and he came across as a decent fella, then all of a sudden started banging on about boats and that it would just shoot them in the head as soon as they got out of the boat. That was the end of that conversation. Absolute wanker." And this is why some of my best friends are steampunks, and I love my two best friends. And the other one said, "It's definitely more in the older generation of steampunks. The younger ones tend to blend more fantasy elements into their approach to the genre. There's also the consideration of the Lovecraft element. Most just approach or use the world of Cthulhu as a story to build characters with, but there are some who agree with Lovecraft's personal views. And then there's the group of people who blatantly use cultural misappropriation, people dressing as Native Americans or Indian Raj. There are some who just use the flag-waving, royalist, imperialistic Victorian elements to excuse or support their modern views. But basically you get twats wherever. I wouldn't say steampunk per se attracts more than its fair share, but those that are there tend to be fairly open about it. But I guess that's just a sad reflection on the world as a whole. The twats would be twats without goggles or pith helmets. It's definitely more to do with the age group than anything else. So, yeah, even within the steampunk community. But unfortunately, that's just reflective of British society as a whole at the moment. I'm probably picking on steampunks unnecessarily, but I am calling you gammon steampunks, not all of you though. Just the ones that wear it as a sense of identity and shag flags.
JT.
You are the steam gammons. The rest of you, you're just having fun, peacocking about, and being creative with your gear, and I'm all for that in that respect, unless you block pavements. When you're out and about at events, stop peacocking and blocking pavements. But sorry, go on. I will drink some Snowball and let you come in there.
Just going to say JTW, just the twats. Just remember that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Here you go.
Yeah.
All right. So where were we?
Well, in other news, we've got some more housekeeping to do.
Oh, whoops.
So, Al Mucker Clarkey sent in a postcard pointing out that the Special Air Police that Bastable joins is likely referencing the Biggles tales from Between the Wars, Biggles of the Special Air Police.
That's
right. There you go. Post-World War I, Biggles was in the Special Air Police. So the synopsis of that is Times of Peace find Biggles still active in the air as Air Detective Inspector Bigglesworth of Scotland Yard's Air Section. Baffling mysteries and strange missions come Biggles' way, in which he is helped by Algie, Bertie and Ginger, his true and tried comrades of earlier days. So there you go, another little reference in there. We got loads of postcards saying, oh, didn't you spot? Or what about? So Clarkey also reminds us that Oswald Bastable was a character in some E. Nesbit books at the turn of the 20th century.
In which series?
I'm going to forget now because my head's a shed. But it's they were written in about 1898, and it's about, I think it's something of the adventurers. It's about a bunch of kids going in search of treasure and having adventures, and Oswald Bastable is one of the children. So
there's no doubt that that's where it comes from.
Moorcock's Bastable, I don't think is intended to be the same character. No, I think he just liked the name.
It's an affectionate nod.
Yeah. So because the Oswald Bastable of Nesbit is still a child having adventures in hedgerows, while Captain Bastable is serving in India. But Moorcock read those books, no doubt, and liked the name. We also had a postcard from Lee Mason. Major Howell struck Powell. We and ahed last time about why change it from Howell to Powell and what could that mean. Well, Lee says the clue is in his Christian name, which we haven't been given yet. You only find that out in the last third of the book. So I think we get a pass for that. It's not revealed in the first part, but Powell's surname, certainly in my copy, his Christian name in my copy, he is Enoch Powell.
Aha. Mr. Rivers of Blood.
Yeah, so, and Howell struck Powell in the book is a keen student of ancient civilizations. The real Powell was a student of the classics and a professor of Greek studies. But with this book being written in 71 and Powell's Rivers of Blood speech bringing him notoriety in 68, I do wonder why Mike went with Howell initially and then would change it to Powell later.
Now, remind me, was Regan in the version I was reading, or was he still, I don't know.
Regan was Regan in the very first published edition, and then it was changed for subsequent editions. So in the Ace Pocketbook edition I've got, which is the first edition, it's Regan.
Okay, so...
And then it's changed to Egan for all subsequent editions until it was corrected back again.
So, in other words, it went in the opposite direction initially.
Yeah.
Powell and Howell.
Yeah, so perhaps it was a situation in reverse. Perhaps Enoch Powell was still a figure of considerable weight and heft that his British editors said, you know what? Let's not go there.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's the usual worries about potential libel or defamation.
Yeah. And whilst he, including a controversial figure suggests that without the collapse of empire and no immigration to rail against, he might have been an all right dude, which is what he appears to be doing, but he's going to pop up again in part 3. So we'll revisit that then. And he does feature prominently in the chapter where Bastable is musing over White Man's Burden.
Yes.
So maybe this is a reverse situation. But from Bastable's, that's it for postcards from the Edge. But from Bastable's perspective now, all is as things should be. And we rejoin Bastable as a lieutenant aboard the airship Locative.
That's right.
Under the command of Captain Quelch in the version I'm reading, which is beginning to irritate me. I can't remember the name of the captain in yours. There's a much more egregious version of this coming up as well, I've got to say, but we'll get to that. It should be a dream job for Bastable, but a scout leader called Regan is about to put a dent in it.
Captain, by the way, I believe it's Captain Harding.
Harding, yeah. I wish he'd left it as Captain Harding.
Yeah.
I really, really do. But let's just take a look. What's the wrong bloody... I've got 2 bookmarks in this book. Let's have a look. So I'll very, very quickly recap the last paragraph of page 93. Okay. And then perhaps if you could read the first couple of pages of chapter 2 of book 2, A Man with a Big Stick.
Yep.
Right, so I suppose it was my strong affection for Captain Quelch, Harding, which led to the first disaster of my new life, a disaster which was to lead to others of increasing consequence until the final one. But again, I'm running ahead of my story. It all began with a freakish change in the weather after we had left San Francisco, bound for British Ecuador, Tahiti, Tonga, and points west. You could blame it on the elements, I suppose, or on me, but I'm rather inclined to blame an offensive little Californian scout leader called Regan. Certainly, if Regan had not come aboard the Locative, I should not have found myself at the centre of subsequent events which were to alter the destinies of a good many people, and perhaps even the whole world. Then we move on to chapter 2.
Yeah. Chapter 2, A Man with a Big Stick. We were moored at Berkeley Air Park, taking on cargo and passengers. Because of a delay in finding mast space, we were a bit behind schedule and hurrying to make up the time as fast as we could. I was keeping an eye on both cargo and passengers, watching the great crates being winched into the bowels of the ship through her loading hatches underneath the lower deck. The liner was secured by about 50 thick steel cables, keeping her perfectly steady at her mast. In the bright sunlight, she cast a wide shadow across the field. I couldn't help feeling proud of her as I looked up. Her hull was silver blue, and the round Union Jack shields shone on her huge tailplanes. Her particulars were emblazoned on her main hull. RMA 801, her registration number. Locative, London. McAfee Lines, Edinburgh. And we also have here all about me were the moored ships of American Imperial Airways, the Versailles Line, Royal Austro-Prussian Aerial Navigation Company, Imperial Russian Airship Company, Air Japan, Royal Italian Airlines, and many smaller lines. But the Locative, it seemed to me, was the finest. She was certainly one of the most famous aerial passenger liners. So I see here, I'm cutting again for a moment. I'm going to rely on you to edit.
I think probably the most important paragraph is where we get to the man himself. So it says, at the entrance to the lift shaft, I stood beside the embarkation officer, who stood on both sides of the doors, checking boarding cards and tickets. There was nothing suspicious about the well-to-do Americans who were coming aboard, although they seemed a trifle annoyed at discovering they were to fly on a different ship, because we find out a few paragraphs earlier that the William Randolph Hearst of American Imperial had developed engine trouble.
Right.
It continues. I smiled a little as I saw the man at the end of the queue. He was about 50 and dressed rather ridiculously in khaki shorts, knee stockings, and green badge-festooned shirt. He carried a polished pole with a little flag on it, and on his head was a wide-brimmed brown hat. His comical appearance was heightened by the look of stern self-importance on his red, lumpy face. His knees shone as redly as his nose, and I wondered if he were, perhaps, a kinematograph or music hall comedian who had not had time to change. Behind him were a score of similarly clad boys of about 12 years old, with knapsacks on their backs and poles in their hands, all looking as deadly serious as the man. So this is our alternate universe, Ronald Reagan.
That's right. In his shorts.
In his shorts. And I think we can probably rather than reading some of his worst depredations, we can probably summarise this a little bit to say that he's a loathsome, arrogant, intolerant little prick who suffers terribly from little man syndrome.
And he's part of the Roosevelt Scouts, the young Rough Riders. Rough Riders, to me, never mind Teddy Roosevelt, but Rough Riders in a more modern context sounds ever so slightly pornographic to me, but that's just me.
Yeah, so this is a century in which Roosevelt never made his achievements related to world wars. He may have been the president, we don't know at this stage.
That's
but
right.
He's the American version of Baden-Powell in this universe.
Yes, not running up San Juan Hill in
No.
Spanish-American War.
No. But this Regan, he seethes when he has to hand over his sidearm to get aboard. He makes a scene at dinner because his puritanical and deeply racist worldview objects to just about everything, from women's clothing to a jazz band, which he refers to as jungle music, and to having to share dining quarters with some young Indian civil servants who he objects to in quite the vilest terms.
Nobody told me that I was coming aboard a flying temple of Jezebel, immoral women displaying themselves. Look! He's wonderful.
Yeah. And I love the little references as well to his little scouts who surround him, like, and they all jut their chins out, and they all feel that if their master, if their leader is in any way loses face, they all stare holes into the person.
Right.
Who puts him down.
His mini-me's.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. There's something interesting here, though, because Bastable himself has only used the most offensive term a few pages ago in his observations of the wonders of London of the 1970s.
That's right.
I don't think Moorcock is maybe explicitly inviting the comparison here. I don't know, maybe it is. But the framing of Bastable's use of the term as an accepted part of Victorian vernacular, inappropriate though it is, versus Regan's use of the term as deliberately and vitriolic and defamatory and insulting and as a way of attack.
Well, and he's and of course the word we're referring to here is the one that everybody calls the N-word. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's used. Moorcock uses it. He deploys that word very much in the British sense of the colonial times in one instance, and then through the lips of an American. And he does make it quite clear, Moorcock does, that while both terms are racist, one of them, from the mind of a guy of Bastable's age, is seen as a more passive term, somehow less harmful than the American context. In the same way that, frankly, in an episode of Fawlty Towers, the Major uses it once, and he's using it to talk about Indians. Yeah. Right. And
oh my God, that's right. I forgot about that.
Right.
And he differentiates between 2 or 3 different slurs, according to what the ethnicity. Oh, yes, I forgot all about that.
But it's all in this very that senile and jolly way of the Majors.
Yeah,
which is not the way white people in America would use that word, which is meant. It's. I mean, they're all dehumanizing. They're all unacceptable. But the American use is maybe it's just my cultural background, but to me, even more pernicious. And Moorcock, when he has Egan Regan saying it, it's meant to be as ugly as it can be. And Moorcock, of course, is showing essentially that even Bastable finds that offensive.
Yeah. Funny enough, there was another British sitcom that used that word a few years later in The Young Ones. I don't know if you're... Yeah, so are you aware of The Young Ones?
I know The Young Ones.
As a cultural thing.
I watched a few episodes at the time.
Written by Ben Elton and Lise Mayer, starring Adrian Edmondson, Rick Mayall, people who became like giants of British comedy. Very early days of alternative comedy. There's one episode where that word is used, but it's used to frame a London police officer as a horrific racist. Because he's the one who uses the term. Because a man turns up at the student house to tell them they've won a competition and rings the doorbell, but he's wearing black leather gloves and the police officer is wearing sunglasses. And the police officer hops up and then you get this little routine with this police officer using a variety of rather unpleasant, dehumanizing terms, which we now don't really tolerate. but
Well,
it was used in the context of a BBC Two sitcom in the early 80s. So, yeah, it's incredible, really, when you think back to what you digested on TV and then went to school the following day, aged 11 or whatever, or 10. Yeah, come a long way in many ways. We've gone a long way back in many others.
yeah. Well, I think that it's in this particular context, he wants you. He's painting with as crude a brush as he can, colors here on the page that say the Scoutmaster is a bad man.
Yeah, I mean, we could go down a very divisive road in terms of semantics and etymology and all this type of thing, but I, for one, certainly not qualified or articulate enough to unpick any of that. But suffice to say, Regan is an awful cunt.
But the interesting thing, he's an awful cunt. The interesting thing here is that Reagan's chief objection is that he and his party are forced to sit next to a group of Indian civil servants at dinner, and of course they're well dressed and sat and quietly talking among themselves. And I do like the fact that the steward and Bastable thinks of a solution to the problem. And of course, Regan is saying, I have to supervise these boys. They can't eat in their cabins. As he says, I have to make sure they eat properly and keep themselves clean. And of course, the Bastable says, I was ready to give up when the steward suggested, poker-faced, that screens might be placed around the table. That would not keep out the music, of course, but at least the captain and his lads would not be forced to see either the scantily dressed ladies or the Indian civil servants.
I think the most fascinating thing about Bastable's view of the 70s is you've not just got Bastable's perspective on things, you've got the rest of the crew who were all genuine, bona fide 1970s air crew who understand this world, and they all fucking hate Reagan as well.
That's right.
They all think he's an absolute prick. So that gives us a little bit of hope or faith in these people that he's found himself amongst. But things do settle down a little bit after that. His entire scout troop go down with air sickness for a couple of days, so they're all puking. After the locomotive flies through a storm, though, things escalate again. He becomes hysterical, demands life rafts and parachutes from the third officer, even intrudes on the bridge to confront the captain, who coolly has him removed back to his cabin under escort. But then it all goes Pete Tong. After a lively start to life in the 1970s for Oswald Bastable, it all goes horrifically wrong when Regan continues to be a hysterical knobber and causes the captain to be injured, effectively ending the old flyer's career. And Bastable is absolutely enraged by this, as we, the readers, are. And I think at this point, Bastable becomes a real representative of the reader, and I find myself thoroughly occupying the mind of Bastable at this point.
Yes.
And it says, on the last night before we were due to reach Sydney, a call came through to the bridge from the third-class dining room. Trouble of some kind. It was my duty to go there and sort it out. Reluctantly, I left the bridge and made my way to the dining hall. In the corner near the galley door there was confusion. White-coated stewards, ratings in midnight blue, men in evening dress and girls in short frocks were all scuffling about, dragging at a man dressed in the all-too-familiar khaki shorts and green shirt of a young rough rider. Around the edges of this melee stood a number of frightened Boy Scouts. I glimpsed Regan's face then. He was clutching his pole in his hands and striking out at those who tried to hold him. His eyes were staring, his face was purple, and he resembled some ludicrous tableau of Custer at the victory of Little Bighorn. He was screaming incoherently, and I caught only a single distasteful word, which he repeats time and time over. To one side, some of the Indian civil servants were talking to the young officer who had summoned me. It's interesting there that in the narrative, Bastable, in his head, this is a single distasteful word. Well, he's actually used this word himself, but even he sees a completely different context to it in this scenario. To one side, some of the Indian civil servants were talking to the young officer who had summoned me. What's all this about, Muir? I asked. Muir shook his head. As far as I can tell, this gentleman asked if he could borrow the salt from Mr. Regan's table. Mr. Regan hit him, sir, then started on this gentleman's friends. I saw now that there was a livid mark on the Indian's forehead. I pulled myself together as best I could and called out, "All right, everybody, let him go. Could you please stand back? Stand back, please." Gratefully, the passengers and crew members moved away from Regan, who stood panting and glaring and plainly out of his mind. With a sudden movement, he leapt on a nearby table, hunched with his stick at the ready. I tried to speak civilly, remembering that it was my duty to protect both the good name of the shipping company, to protect the name of my own service, and to give Mr. Regan no opportunity to sue anyone or use his political connections to harm anyone. It was hard to remember all this, particularly when I hated the man so much. I did my best to feel sorry for him, to humour him. It's over now, Captain Regan. If you will apologise to the gentleman you struck. Apologise to that scum? With a snarl, Regan aimed a blow at me with his pole. I grabbed it and dragged him off the table. If I had struck him then, in order to calm him down, I might have been forgiven, but it was as if his own madness was infectious. Regan put up his snarling face to mine and growled, "Give me my stick, you damned loving British sissy." It was too much for me. I don't actually remember striking the first blow. I remember punching and being pulled back. I remember seeing his blood flowing from his cut face. I remember shrieking something about what he had done to the skipper. I remember his pole clutched in my hands, rising and falling, and then I was being pulled back by several ratings, and everything became suddenly, terrifyingly calm, and Regan lay on the floor, bruised and bloody and completely insensible, perhaps dead. I turned, dazed, and saw the shocked faces of the scouts, the passengers, the crew. I saw the second officer, now in command, come running up. I saw him look down at Regan's body and say, "Is he dead?" "He should be," said someone, "but he isn't." The second officer came up to me and there was pity in his face. "You poor devil, Bastable," he said. "You shouldn't have done it, old man. You're in trouble now, I'm afraid." Well, he might be in trouble, but it's quite satisfying, that.
That's right. And of course, the Sydney Herald headline, "American tourist attacked by police officer."
Yeah, it's pretty satisfying, that. And I also love the image of him leathering Regan while all his little Boy Scouts are stood 5 feet away watching.
It is a good one.
It's a terrific image.
But of course, he's lost his discipline, and I love the way that he knows what's going to happen. But when he gets the cable from the commanding officer in London, of course, it says, "Return at once."
Yeah. You know, while it could be easy to regard this whole Regan bit as a bit of stunt casting, or whatever the appropriate term would be for this kind of fictional cameo, it's another good example of how something Moorcock wrote in the early 70s has gradually seen itself become current and topical again over 50 years later.
That's right.
Because the Regan that this was lampooning did go on for 10 or so years after this book was published to be the USA president for 2 terms, and the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, but he did his work with a veneer of respectability. And his career as an actor, I think, prepared him for that, giving him the polish and presentation of someone acting presidential. But here we are 50 years later. And what have we got now? We've got a president who's once again massively widening the wealth gap and serving the needs of rich and corporations and tech companies. But in presentation, he's actually much closer to Rough Rider Ronnie than the real President Reagan, except it's even worse, to a quite horrifying degree. Crikey. I think that's why some of the people who've been dropping us lines have been saying, Warlord of the Air was great at the time, it's even better now.
Yeah, absolutely. And regarding things today, all I can say is I can echo Francis Urquhart from House of Cards. You may think that. You may very well think that. I could possibly comment. Very
true, but I can. So it's all right. You can nod sagely or shake your head wisely as I unveil my thoughts about things.
I love sage nodding. It's a great career advancement technique.
Yeah. So unlike most of Mike's fiction as well, he's taking a long hard look here at how in a more conventional setting close to our own, if you take direct action to confront hate and fear rather than stand by and hold your nose, it can have quite big consequences for your life in terms of the response to the society you inhabit. But we're only a couple of days on from someone perhaps not even taking direct action, just trying to drive away and get shot in the face 3 times. So, this is all, we're living in a very, very depressing time, unfortunately.
Now as for Bastable, he goes through a career setback, and the only blanket that he has to keep him warm is the certainty of his morally correct behavior. It doesn't seem to be enough to really help him. He goes through a period of some disillusion.
He does seem to bounce from opportunity to opportunity, though, doesn't he? Because it happens again. Thanks to support from the captain and the other officers, he's asked to resign rather than be sacked.
That's right.
Because they all speak for him. But things take another interesting turn when, following delivering his resignation back in London to, well, in my version, Major Nye.
Oh, I love Major Nye from the Cornelius books. He's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But no, he's not Major Nye here.
Yeah. There's a more egregious retitling of a character to come.
Yeah.
But the CEO tells him he's got a message from his brother and he'll meet him at the Royal Aeronautical Club that evening. Oh, curious. So, Chapter 4, A Bohemian Brother. I'm going to read a little bit of this because I really, really love it. I'm going to try and get through this without losing my voice. As I sat back in the smoothly moving cab, I stared out of the windows and tried to collect my thoughts. Since the incident with Regan, I'd been stunned, and only now that I had left my barracks behind me was I beginning to realise the implications of my actions. You know, it'd be a lot easier if I put my readers on. There we go. Oh, that's better. I also realised that I'd got off rather lightly, all things considered. Yet my efforts to become accepted by the society of 1974 had, it now appeared, been completely wasted. I was much more of an outsider than when I had first arrived. I had disgraced my uniform and put myself beyond the pale. What was more, the euphoric dream had begun to turn into a crazy nightmare. I took out my watch. It was only 3 p.m, not evening by anyone's standards. I was uncertain as to what kind of reception I might have at the RAC. I was, of course, a member, but it was quite possible they would wish me to resign, as I had resigned from the Special Air Police. I couldn't blame anyone for wishing this. After all, I was likely to embarrass the other members. I would leave my visit until the last possible moment. I tapped on the roof and told the cabby to stop at the nearest pedestrian ingress. Then I got out of the cab, paid my fare, and began to wander listlessly around the arcades beneath the graceful columns supporting the traffic levels. I stared at the profusion of exotic goods displayed in the shop windows. Goods brought from all corners of the empire, reminding me of places I might never see again. Searching for escape, I went into a cinema and watched a musical comedy set in the 16th century, featuring an American actor called Humphrey Bogart playing Sir Francis Drake, and a Swedish actress, Bogart's wife I believe, called Greta Garbo, as Queen Elizabeth. Oddly, it is one of the clearest impressions I have of that day.
Humphrey Bogart and Francis Drake. I can't see it. Garbo is Queen Elizabeth. I can buy that.
Yeah, it would be an interesting thing. I watched the Cairn Mutiny the other day, though. When we were in Manchester, and I was in the hotel. I think it was in the morning, and we were just waiting to go somewhere, and the Cairn Mutiny was on, in which Bogart plays a really frazzled destroyer captain who just melts down and is like traumatized, cowardly. And it was a really, really remarkable performance from Bogart because he never really played that kind of role very often.
No.
So, yeah, who knows? A lot of respect for Bogart after watching the Cairn Mutiny.
Well, we watch him in Key Largo if you haven't seen that one. With him and Edward G. Robinson and I think Lauren Bacall. That's a very, very good film. Right. So Humphrey, he was Captain. He was Queeg.
Yeah.
I had to go look up the name.
Of course.
Yeah.
Queeg, Quelch. Ooh, crikey.
I know.
Anyway, it continues. At about 7 o'clock, I turned up at the club and slipped unnoticed into the pleasant gloom of the bar, decorated with dozens of airship mementos. There were a few chaps chatting at tables, but luckily nobody recognised me. I ordered a whiskey and soda and drank it down rather quickly. I had had several more by the time someone touched me on the arm, and I turned suddenly, fully expecting to be asked to leave. Instead, I was confronted by the cheerful grin on the face of a young man dressed in what I had learned was the fashion amongst the wilder undergraduates at Oxford. His black hair was worn rather long, and brushed back without a parting. He wore what was virtually a frock coat with velvet lapels, a crimson cravat, a brocade waistcoat, and trousers cut tightly to the knee and then allowed to flare at the bottom. We should have recognised it in 1902 as being very similar to the dress affected by the so-called aesthetes. It was deliberately bohemian and dandified, and I regarded people who wore this uniform with some suspicion. They were not my sort at all. Where I'd escaped notice, this young man had the disapproving gaze of all. I was acutely fucking hell, I can't speak.
He stepped right out of Carnaby Street, 1966.
Yeah, and he's wearing flares.
Right.
Wearing flares in 1973, so even this alternative 1973, people are wearing wafters, which is nice.
Well, I will say, just as an aside for a second, that one thing that happens repeatedly in this book is this idea that he gets at this idea of the inevitability of certain things happening, which of course, as the end of each novel demonstrates. But the interesting thing is that he treats history as strands, right? And so, and if there's millions or infinite numbers of universes in this multiverse, he does show that just because certain things evolved in a certain way or transpired in a certain way doesn't mean that they all went on one track. So you see multiple strange things pop up that are variations upon what would have really happened in the sense of, when I say really, I mean in our world, in our history. And so all these things being very different, but then having the kind of stylish hippie throwback look has come through completely the same as it has in our lives.
Yeah, it doesn't matter which part of the multiverse you're in, you can't escape the inevitability of wafters. There's just no escaping it. Or Moorcock's propensity for writing about sartorial flair.
That's also there. He loves the clothes.
So this guy's called Cornelius Dempsey in mine.
And he's essentially, what do you think, a Jerry O'Connell, a Jerry Cornelius? I
think so, yeah. Is he Cornelius Dempsey in yours as well?
Yes, he is. Dempsey, I don't know.
No, but Cornelius is there. That's enough, isn't it? He's got black hair. He's called Cornelius. He's wearing wafters. Good enough.
Yeah.
He takes Bastable to a groovy cellar bar where everybody else wears wafters too, which is nice. And he offers him a job aboard the 1970s version of a tramp steamer, which made me very happy.
Yes.
Because he's been following Bastable with some interest. After all, we know Bastable had his 15 minutes of fame as the airman rescued with amnesia from the ruins of Teku Benga, and Dempsey likes the cut of his jib, particularly his apparent defence of the Indian civil servants aboard the Locomotive, which Bastable half-heartedly, and I've got to say only half-heartedly, attempts to dismiss as incidental. So Dempsey takes Bastable to an old hotel in Croydon, where he introduces him to the Polish exile Korzeniowski, a mature, bearded air dog who Bastable takes to immediately. And Korzeniowski offers him a job as second officer aboard his independent vessel, and not having many other options, Bastable accepts, although he does wonder about the relationship between the boho Dempsey and this political exile from one of those subject states of the Russian Empire.
And we are going to reveal who the real world Korzeniowski was.
Of course. Well, there's a few things here. The name is the real name of Joseph Conrad, isn't it?
Right.
But there are characters that could perhaps be closer in terms of being real-life analogues to the actual character, because there were a number of 1970s dissidents in our world. And this, as Korzeniowski reveals himself and his position, he comes across, it's more of like a Lech Walesa kind of character. Arrested, Walesa was arrested multiple times throughout the 70s and 80s. His trade union group was outlawed, whereas Korzeniowski intimates that he would have been killed had he remained in Poland, so he fled to Britain.
That's right.
That also could have been the case for there were many other Polish dissidents like Kuron and Modzelewski. There were loads. I'm not the guy to unpack all that because I don't know enough about those kind of politics. But I think he's got the birth name of Joseph Conrad. We know there's a lot of Conrad going on in Mike's work at this time. See also the Ice Schooner for more details on that. But it feels like a composite character at this point of all sorts of different Polish dissidents, or a suggestion that Conrad, had he stayed in Poland, may have ended up being a Polish dissident who escaped and became an airship captain, because why not? Why not indeed? Bottom line, though, Bastable's been sought out by this boho dandy and a Polish dissident in exile to work aboard their airship and transport some passengers. And other than the sheer intrigue, I really enjoyed this chapter purely as a kid reading this with a sense of wonder for a couple of reasons. One is, I love the idea of Croydon as a port town.
Yeah, it's a good one. I like that as well.
Yeah, this vast airship park with all kinds of vessels moored at these huge masts and the town serving the needs of them and their crews. I love it. Have you ever been to Croydon?
Yes, I have.
The appeal of this inversion of the drudgery and once futuristic concrete town planner wet dream that Croydon is. That's also behind the brilliant Croydon Spaceport zines by Tom and Jane Murphy as well, Colossal Press, by the way. There's a really fantastic Croydon Spaceport fun pack that you can get from Colossal Press. It's terrific. Check them out if you haven't already, folks. I'll link to them in the show notes anyway. But when I first read this as a kid, my only point of reference for Croydon was a 2000 AD story. So back in the late 70s and early 80s, 2000 AD, you had the editor Tharg the Mighty, who was an alien who'd come to Earth to produce the galaxy's greatest comic. And he had the occasional one-shot story. And one of them was called The Creep Who Stole Croydon. And it was some space tyrant stole all of Croydon and sucked it up into space. And Tharg had to sort it out. And the only other way I was probably familiar with Croydon was the sitcom Terry and June. The opening titles, they were in a shopping centre in Croydon. Yeah.
I can tell you how Croydon entered my consciousness. It was where Sarah Jane Smith was from.
Oh,
Croydon, South Croydon, something like that.
oh. I was thinking Surbiton, but that was The Good Life.
No, this is Sarah Jane Smith.
There you go. Sarah Jane Smith's a Croydon girl.
I think there's a few episodes where they open the door of the TARDIS and one of them says, "It doesn't look like South Croydon."
That's right. You're absolutely right.
And
when he drops her off, he doesn't even drop her off in Croydon.
Oh, that's right. That's right. He misses.
He drops her off at the wrong place. Oh, wonderful. But Mike really, really, really leans into some of this in terms of colour and flavour, more so than most of his fantasy fiction of the time. There's a really fantastic bit where he's talking about Croydon that I absolutely love.
Next morning, I took an omnibus to the air park. There were dozens of airships moored there, coming and going like monstrous bees around a monstrous hive. In the autumn sunshine, the hulls of the vessels shone like silver or gold or alabaster. Before he had left the previous night, Dempsey had given me the name of the ship I was to join. She was called the Rover, a rather romantic name, I thought. And the air park authorities had told me she was moored to number 14 mast. I was, in the cold light of day, as it were, beginning to wonder if I had not acted rather hastily in accepting the position, but it was too late for second thoughts. I could always leave the ship later if I found that I wasn't up to what was expected of me. When I got to number 14 mast, I found that she had been shifted to make room for a big Russian freighter with a combustible cargo which had to be taken off in a hurry. Nobody seemed to know where the Rover was now moored. Eventually, after half an hour of fruitless wandering about, I was told to go to number 38 mast, right on the other side of the park. I trudged between the huge hulls of liners and cargo ships, dodging between the shivering mooring cables, circumnavigating the steel girders of the masts, until at last I saw number 38 and my new craft. She was battered and she needed painting, but she was as brightly clean as the finest liner. She had a hard hull, obviously converted from a soft fabric cover of the old type. She was swaying a little at her mast and seemed, by the way she moved in her cables, very heavily loaded. Her 4 big old-fashioned engines were housed in outside nacelles, which had to be... Am I pronouncing that correctly, nacelles?
Nacelles. I would say nacelles. Americans say nacelles sometimes, but I prefer nacelles.
It's coming from French, so I think nacelle.
Yeah.
Which had to be reached by means of partly covered catwalks, and her inspection walks were completely open to the elements. I felt like someone who'd been transferred from the Oceanic to take up a position on a tramp steamer. Well, hey, I like tramps, I like steamers. For all that I came up, that was me, not Moorcock. For all that I came from a period of time before any airship had seemed a practical means of travel, my interest in the Rover was almost one of historical curiosity as I looked her over. She was certainly weather-beaten. The silvering on her hull was beginning to flake, and the lettering of her number, 806, name and registration, London, had peeled off in places. Since it was illegal to have even a partially obliterated registration, there were a couple of airshipmen hanging in a pulley platform suspended from the topside catwalk, touching up the transfers with black creosote. She was even older than my first ship, the Loch Ness, and much more primitive, with a slightly piratical look about her. I doubted she boasted such things as computers, temperature regulators, or anything but the most unsophisticated form of wireless telephone, and her speed could not have been much over 80 miles per hour.
I love it. I love it. I want to be there next to him.
Right, and this is where I say that there are times when he does do the stacks and stacks of world building that I've heard you and other guests discuss, where I say to myself as I'm listening, but yes, when it comes to Moorcock, especially with books like this, I'm signing up for that kind of description. The ice schooner as well. I want that stuff. It really lets me feel the atmosphere.
Yeah, the town in the crevice in the ice schooner and the bar that's like the whale bone in Hull. Yeah. I just love all that stuff. You know, okay, it's basically a whaling town, which has fairly unpleasant connotations, but the amount of detail and the smell of it and the sweat of it, it's really tangible. And his descriptions of these airship parks, I think, are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
I can visualise Bastable on the ground looking up at this, quite modest airship, but like looking at it approvingly. Yeah, I'm utterly sold. Utterly sold. They have some passengers aboard, and I want to be one of them in a grubby white flannel suit, naturally.
Oh, sounds perfect.
But so far, Bastable gets his quarters. He's only briefly glimpsed one passenger, a woman with a fair collar. Mysterious.
And one whom he doesn't fall in love with within 5 minutes. Absolutely. Very atypical Moorcock plot device.
Do you know what?
Now,
Excuse me.
I fell in love with her in the first 5 minutes. Una Persson she was an early literary crush of mine.
Yeah. It's a very valid point that Bastable has been out with girls on dates and he hasn't instantly thrown himself at their feet and declared love for them. Bastable is so much more textured and advanced character than 90% of Moorcock's fantasy characters. It's terrific. But his glimpses passage are, after arriving over Jerusalem, he has a curious conversation with the rover's telephone operator, who appears to be mischievously trying to yank his chain, as Bastable muses on the nature of the passengers. But we do learn something about the nature of the political situation. But first of all, there's a really nice little bit where, let's have a look, we found a little bit about the captain. It says, the captain took his position. This is more of that, like, Moorcock really buys into this airship thing, right? He's never written anything about ships leaving port with this level of detail. And I'm reading this, I'm thinking, Mike's got a real hard-on for airships.
He and Ballard, I don't know how they both have an aviation thing going on. And, and Ballard in a lot of his books, of course, he has, the small airplanes used as a device of escape, as well as in a sense, I think, sexual fulfillment. Yeah. Well, of course, with Ballard, anything with some wheels or wings is going to be, ultimately speaking, a foreplay device. But both of them clearly have a kind of that certain reverence for aviation, flying away as a metaphor and as a literal thing. And it goes from Empire of the Sun through all the space stuff that Ballard did early in his career, and then to the more sort of interior, shall we say, psychological thrillers of some of his better known work.
Yeah, you don't normally get this level of kind of fetishistic detail, right, from Moorcock about transport.
But I get off on it every single time.
Me too. Yeah. And I'm going to read it because it's fucking great. So the captain took his position in the bow and peered down so that he could see the main mooring chains in the gangway. Barry went to the annunciator and stood by with the tube in his hand. The boatswain stood halfway down the companionway to the embarkation platform, his body bisected by the deck of the bridge. "Gangway withdrawn," said the captain. "Close and seal embarkation doors, boatswain." The boatswain relayed this order to an unseen man below. There were noises, thumps, shouts. Then the boatswain's head appeared on the companionway again. "All ready to slip, sir." "Let slip." The captain straightened his back and drove both hands into the pockets of his jacket, his cheroot clamped between his teeth. "Let slip below," said Barry into the tube. There was a jerk as we were released by the mast. "All cables free." "All cables free below," said Barry. The mooring cables snapped away and were released into the air. And we were released into the air. "Engines full astern." Barry adjusted a switch. "All engines full astern." He was speaking now to the engineers crouched in their outside nacelles, nursing their diesels. The ship shuddered and bucked slightly as the engines backed her away from the mast. 250 feet height, coxswain," said the captain, still peering through the bow observation port. 250, sir." The coxswain spun his great metal wheel. Slowly we crawled into the sky, our bow tilting upward slightly as the elevator coxswain operated his controls, adjusting the tailplanes. And for the first time I had a sense of loss. I felt I was leaving behind everything I had come to understand about this world of the 1970s, embarking on what for me would be a fresh voyage of discovery. I felt a bit like one of the ancient Elizabethan navigators who had set off to look for the other side of the planet. Croydon Airport dropped behind us and we cruised over the fields of Kent towards the coast, gradually rising to a height of 1,000 feet, moving at something under 50 miles per hour. The ship responded surprisingly well, and I began to realise there was more to the rover than I had thought. I was learning not to judge an airship by her appearance. Primitive though her controls were, she flew smoothly and steadily, and she was almost stately in her progress through the sky. Barry, whom I had taken for a drunkard at the end of an unsavoury career, proved an efficient officer, and I was to discover he drank heavily only when he was not in the air. I hoped that my stiff manner did not make my fellow officers think me a bit of a prig.
Oh, but he is the most lovable sort of prig.
Oh, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. This is the feeling, and I've So I was born on an Air Force base,
Mm.
as luck would have it. My father was in the Air Force at the time, and a physician at the base. And he's a aviation enthusiast, and so from early on in my life, I learned how to identify the planes and the flight path over our house. I found myself often at airfields for one thing or another, and there is a particular, and I really like it because he never says it, but he shows it, that particular feeling of potential that exists at dawn on an airfield, when the sun is just coming up, it's still a bit of fog and mist, and already, the people involved in pilots and staff and all the rest of them are up, and it feels like that flight into the sun is a kind of possibility that the whole world is there before you, with anything can happen. That's a personal feeling for me, but I have every confidence when he writes about letting slip the airship, that this is the kind of thing that he's driving at. And it's a gorgeous feeling, and it's really nice to see, even in what we would call sort of more pulp oriented fantasy and the kind of books that he's known for. Yeah. This is where you see some of that blossoming of the literary nature that I think that he would try to emphasize over the next few years.
There's a little bit of dialogue here I think we should read.
All right.
Between Bastable and Steaton.
I'll take, you take Bastable.
Okay. So it's the bit where Steaton is teasing him a little bit about his lack of knowledge of current affairs.
And he's Johnson for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What the hell? Oh, really? All right, okay. Well, let's go. I'll read from We Had No One on Board Who Was Specifically a Navigator.
Ready.
We had no one on board who was specifically a navigator or meteorological officer. These duties were shared between the skipper, Barry, and myself. The night before we arrived at Jerusalem, I had taken the dog watch and was checking our course against our charts and instruments when the telephone operator wandered in and started up a conversation. At length, he said,
"What do you make of our passengers, Bastable?"
I shrugged. I don't make anything of them, Steaton. I've only had a glimpse of one of them, a woman.
"I think they're refugees. The old man says they're getting off at Brunei."
"Really? Not the safest spot in the world. Haven't they had bandit trouble there?"
"Terrorists of some kind, well organized, I gather. I heard the Germans and Japanese are backing them. Want some of our colonies, I shouldn't wonder."
"There are agreements. They wouldn't dare."
"Oh, you're a bit green, Bastable. There's trouble brewing all over the East. Nationalism, old man. India, China, Southeast Asia. People are getting worried."
Steaton was a pessimist who relished such prospects. I took everything he said with a pinch of salt.
"I shouldn't be surprised if our passengers aren't countrymen of the old man. Polish exiles, or even Russian anarchists, eh?"
"Come off it, Steaton. The skipper would have nothing to do with that sort of thing."
Oh, dear, Bastable. You are green. Sorry to have interrupted."
He sauntered out of the bridge. I smiled and dismissed his bantering. He was plainly trying to agitate me, the sort of joke which is often played on new boys on board any ship. Still, the passengers did seem anxious to keep themselves to themselves. Well, we learn a little bit more about some of this shortly, because overseeing some cargo transfers the following day, Bastable buys a local newspaper and reads that terrorists bombed the house of the English nobility involved in the administration of Jerusalem, leaving the slogan "Freedom for the Colonies" on a wall. And the paper report includes 8 photographs of suspected fanatics responsible, including...
The notorious Count Rudolfo Guevara.
What is it in yours?
He's Rudolfo Guevara. Rudolfo.
Oh, good Lord. So in the Ace Pocket Edition, he is Rudolf von Dutschke.
Oh, Rudy Dutschke.
Rudy Dutschke.
But he was the left-wing German politician, I think, who was assassinated, if I remember correctly. I have to look it up.
There was an assassination attempt on him, but he died like 8 or 9 years later from the effects.
Okay.
So yeah, so in the 71 Ace Pocketbook edition, it's a reference to Rudy Dutschke, German green sociologist and revolutionary who was a proponent of the Long March. So
that's
the
right.
idea that revolution is a long, complicated process in which people have to change, and such change is affected only by a long march through the institutions. Now in this edition, in this version, calls back nicely to the Shavianism that we talked about in the last episode. The Shavian, the girls going and watching the Shavian plays.
That's right.
But in this world, a world of powerful empires that have not been brought low by 2 world wars, this Rudi Dutschke has come to more radical conclusions. But in yours, it's Guevara.
He's Guevara. By the way, long been chased out of his Portuguese homeland and had until the bombing been thought to be in hiding in Germany, and why a nobleman should turn against his own kind and all the ideals of his upbringing nobody could understand. Does that passage about Guevara apply to Dutschke in your edition?
No. And in this edition, the latest edition,
yes,
the latest version, it's Rudolf von Beck.
Dutschke was better. You know what? God bless the von Becks, but they don't need to be plastered all over the back catalogue.
You know what? It really, really winds me up, this. Because having it be Dutschke, you get that callback to the Shavianism of the young intellectual women.
Yes.
And the idea that there are connections running right across the societies between the beliefs of the younger generations and the beliefs of people who are anti-imperialistic. Making him a Guevara, all right, I suppose. Making him a von Beck, what does it achieve? And surely the original version is more interesting.
And now remember, in the one that I read to you, where he's Guevara, he had been chased out of his Portuguese homeland and thought to have been hiding in Germany. In the version which you sent to me, the Nomad of the Time Streams, the one published by Dark Fantasy.
Yep.
In that one, he's the notorious Count Rudolf von Beck, who had long since been chased out of his Saxon homeland and had, until the bombing, been thought to be in hiding in Italy.
Right, so for von Dutschke, who had long since been chased out of his German homeland and had, until the bombing, been thought to be hiding in Denmark, why a Prussian nobleman should turn against his own kind and all the ideals of his upbringing nobody could understand. So 3 different bloody versions, and I've got to say the von Beckization of his older novels gets really irritating.
Yeah, it does.
Really irritating, because Rudi Dutschke himself was a fascinating character.
I think, and in fact, I think potentially the one with the most subtlety over the long run, because he hasn't lasted in the popular imagination the way that Guevara has. And von Beck, on the other hand, is just, it's a bit of a, to me, an attempt to please. It's a little bit of an over-pleasing.
It's fan service.
It's fan service.
It's fan service, and it's a real shame because, you know, his impact on the politics of Germany was so impressive that neo-Nazis attempted to assassinate him.
That's right.
In the late 60s. And those injuries he sustained, and the head injuries he sustained, did eventually contribute to his death 10 years later. But he came to the UK for a protracted period of time. There are reasons why people like Rudi Dutschke, we should know who they are. And I know that 1 in 10,000 people will read this, but it's still an opportunity to actually promote the life or the existence of Rudi Dutschke.
Yeah.
Rather than changing it to Che Guevara in the 70s or 80s.
I'm going to assume that in the edition that you have, Dutschke would have been in the headlines enough at the time for him to justify the inclusion. And now remember, the one I'm reading was published in 1984 and then reprinted in 85 and 86.
Yeah.
So Guevara at that point would be a figure who had lasted over the popular imagination around the world.
Yeah.
In a sense that Dutschke didn't. And then, of course, we move on to von Beck, who exists fondly in the hearts and minds of several thousand people around the world.
I can understand that for more recent readers, these connections might seem fun or even profound, depending on how into this stuff you are. But having been weaned on the originals, I do find it a bit tedious.
Well, it's like, you know what? I know a guy, and I've mentioned him on this show, I think 2 episodes ago. Anybody who's into weird music might have heard of the Hafler Trio. And the guy who is the Hafler Trio tells a story in several interviews about having been brought up, being familiar with the monaural version of the White Album, and then hearing the stereo version as an adult and saying, whoa, this is not the same thing, right? Yeah. How jarring it is when you hear something or come across something that's dramatically different than what you've been used to.
Yeah. I don't think making him von Beck doesn't add anything. It takes substance away. It takes substance away. And excuse me. Sorry, I'll just have another slug of. I'm drinking pints of Snowball to try and line my throat.
What is that made of?
It's made of Warnink's Advocaat, which hasn't yet turned solid, so I'm not having to slice it, and lemonade.
All right.
So it's some of the last of my Christmas stash. But having that name recognition in a new moment that doesn't have the impact or resonance of the early 70s stories, where the Eternal Champions were just starting to overlap.
Yeah.
And removing Rudi Dutschke just to have another Von Beck link, I think that the book's worse for it, in my opinion. It's worse for it. So I suppose, long shot, people, if you're out there and you can get a good condition copy of the Ace edition of Warlord of the Air, that's probably your best bet, in my opinion. Because not only that, it doesn't have the beauty of the illustrations of the edition that we were talking about, which you now have, but it does have some really nice James Cawthorne sketches in it.
Those are nice. Mine has no sketches at all. I mean, my 84 version.
Yeah, that was the second ever. That was the second ever copy I had, and that was where I read The Land Leviathan and the Steel Tsar. And I don't think I've read them since. So
we're gonna have a great time.
Oh yeah. Now, so far in these rereads with the more modern editions, I don't think we've had a straight implication that Bastable is an aspect of the Eternal Champion.
No,
but we might have, and I might have missed it.
Which is it?
I hope we don't. From memory, he does briefly pop up in one of the Dances at the End of Time books. I think he maybe pops up in the Hollowlands or the End of All Songs as one of the League of Temporal Adventurers.
I read those books so long ago.
Same. But I'm pretty sure he and Una Persson turn up at the End of Time in the End of All Songs.
Well, I rather hope so, because I like them.
Yeah, I remember at the time going, ooh, but it made sense in the context of that part of the narrative.
Right.
Not that Bastable gets much to do, he's just there.
Yes.
So you find out that after all of his adventures, he does end up getting some level of stability being part. I'm sure they called it the League of Temporal Adventures, but I might have got that wrong. I might be mixing up my genre entries.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I think it is if it's not the League, it's the something like that.
Yeah. The League of Temporal Adventurers, that might be Luther Arkwright. I honestly can't remember. It'll come back to me. Well, one day we'll end up doing Dances at the End of Time, probably in 2037. So we'll find out one day. Bastable, eventually, though, does find out who these passengers are. And Rudi von Dutschke / Count Rudolf von Beck is one of them. And we'll just have a little bit here. Right, I'll see if I can get through this without losing my lungs. He tears his share unloading cargo, and the captain instructs him to go and change. And he says, "If you think so, sir." I let one of our riggers keep an eye on the cargo, went through the main passage between the hulls and climbed the companionway up to the bridge, and from there to my cabin. It was stinking hot in the little passage, and all the doors of the cabins were open. For the first time, I got a clear look at the passengers as I passed. I couldn't stop and gape at them, though it took a considerable effort of will not to do so. I went into my own cabin and closed the door. I was shaking as I sat down on the lower bunk and slowly removed the folded newspaper from my pocket. I had seen a man and a woman in the passenger cabin. The woman I had not recognised, but the face of the man was all too familiar. I opened the newspaper and looked again at the photographs of the anarchists wanted in connection with the attempt on Sir George Brown's life. My brain seething with 100 different thoughts, I looked hard at one of the photographs. There was no doubt about it. The tall, handsome man I had seen in the cabin was Count Rudolf von Dutschke, the notorious anarchist and assassin. Tears came into my eyes as the implications of this revelation dawned on me. The kindly old airship skipper, who had impressed me so much as a man of character and integrity, into whose hands I had so willingly put my fate, was himself, at very least, a socialist sympathiser.
Dun, dun, dun.
I was overwhelmed by a profound sense of betrayal. How could I have misjudged someone so badly? I should, of course, contact the authorities and warn them at once, but how could I leave the ship without arousing suspicion? Doubtless all the officers and every member of the crew were of the same desperate persuasion as their captain. It was unlikely that I would reach the police in Jerusalem alive, and yet it was my duty to try. Time must have passed rapidly while I carried on this debate with myself, for suddenly I felt the ship lurch and realised we'd already let slip from the mooring mast. I was aloft, helpless now to do anything, in a ship full of dangerous and fanatical men who would certainly stop at nothing to silence me if they realised I suspected them. With a groan, I buried my head in my hands.
That's a very Eternal Champion thing to do.
Oh, very much so.
He has just experienced a wave of self-pity.
Yeah, that's very true.
And an overestimation of his importance.
Yeah, that's true. What a fool I had been to trust Dempsey, evidently now one of the same gang. I put it down to the fact I had been badly disorientated after giving in my resignation. The door opened suddenly and I jumped nervously. It was Barry. He was smiling. I looked at him in horror. How could he disguise his true nature so well?
What's the matter, old chap? Touch of the sun? The old man sent me to see if you were all right.
Who? The passengers. Why are they aboard? I wanted to hear him give me an answer which would prove his and Captain Korzeniowski's innocence. He looked at me in surprise for a moment and then said,
What, them across the passage? Why, they're just old friends of the skipper's. He's doing them a favor.
A favour?
That's right. Look here, you better lie down for a bit. You should have worn a hat, you know. Would you like a drop of something strong to pull you round?
He moved towards his locker. How could he act so casually? I could only suppose that a life led so long beyond the bounds of the law had created an attitude of indifference both to the suffering caused to others and the corruption in one's own soul. What chance had I against such men as Barry?
No, Mr. Bastable, I expect you to die.
Interestingly, there it says when it says bounds of the law with a capital L.
Oh, geez. You know what? In mine as well.
Yeah. Let's have a look at the 71 edition.
He's a sneaky one.
Yeah. Is there anything to this? Who knows? Come on, 71 edition. Give up your secrets. Yep, capital L in there as well. So, oh, crikey. Has Bastable fallen in with airship anarchists?
And moreover, will they brainwash him? Will they man him?
Well, this is the problem when you deal with leftist workists.
Will they love him to death?
Yeah, they will contaminate his brain.
That's right.
With love and good intentions.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
so we talked about George Griffiths and the Angel of the Revolution back on our episode of the Moorcock curated anthology before Armageddon. And there's plenty of that going on here in terms of inspiration. And there was a number of other stories that date from around that time as well. Michael on the Discord mentioned one that had a airship anarchists and a dodgy German.
Yeah.
Turn of the 20th century airship story with dodgy German anarchists and bombers.
So what we're seeing here, in essence, is and it accelerates in the next in the third and final. It's 3 books, right? That's in the third and final book in the Warlord of the Air. We see it accelerate, but essentially, Bastable is slowly having his worldview taken away and replaced bit by bit with not just a more realistic worldview, but one that's one that is more enlightened.
He's on a journey, isn't he?
It's a Bildungsroman.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is he's on a journey, and it's not an Ericos journey, which is, hey, this babe's hot, I will annihilate our enemies. Oh, our enemies have got a hot babe. I'll switch sides.
Yes.
And annihilate the other side.
Yes.
Okay, there's slightly more to it.
But he's also undergoing the sort of his growth as a human. Of course, is also kind of done the hard way because, everything that he's lucky in the sense that he never falls into a situation of nothing. To keep this book going, there's always another thing that just when things seem like they're horrible, he lands in another situation. So he keeps going and going. But the hard part for him is that to build him up as a new and enlightened kind of human, it involves, it seems to be, a series of penalties, difficulties, and beatings that just essentially break him down. It's like he's undergoing the school of hard knocks.
Well, you know what? We all need that to define our Weltanschauung, don't we?
Yeah, I've been doing this since 1973.
Yeah, fuck it. Well, what's going to happen now? That's the key question. How will Bastable deal with his journey, and how will he respond to this massive impact on his worldview? Well, we'll find out in part 3. Because why not turn this into a 5.5-hour podcast?
Well, look at that. You and I managed to go through a book, even going off piste a few times, in 1.5 hours.
That's not too bad.
I'm getting better at this. The My next plan is to at some point this year is to do this from a time zone where I can join you with booze.
Oh, that would be good.
I'm ever so much more entertaining after a few.
Well, this is about, I would say, an hour and 29, 30 minutes for 1/3 of a Moorcock late 60s, early 70s book is about par for this podcast.
Yeah.
Because, we did Elbrick of Melniboné in 3, we did Jewel in the Skull in 3. We've done many of them in 3, and about an hour and a half is around about par, I would say. So the fact that we did part 1 in 2.5 hours, well, you know what? We had to set the scene, didn't we? We had to set the scene. Well, Robert, thank you so much for returning for part 2 from an entirely different part of the world, because, of course, you're not in the Azores this time. Where are you? You're in...
No, I'm on another island. I'm on Martha's Vineyard in the town of Edgartown. For those of you who are familiar or are not familiar with Martha's Vineyard and Edgartown in particular, you've probably seen the movie Jaws, which was shot all over this island, including significant parts of it were shot right down the street from my house. In fact, that's where Alex Kintner's mother delivers the famous slap of Sheriff Brody.
Oh, really? That's on your street?
5 minutes from the house on foot.
Yeah,
it's all right down there. In fact, I ran into Richard Dreyfuss last summer, who was here 50th anniversary celebrations.
Don't you tend to have like retired senators and congressmen living on Martha's Vineyard as well?
There are people like that. I think John Kerry is here. But there's lots of famous people who live here in the summer, or should I say, as a verb, they summer here. Spike Lee, Kelsey Grammer, Meg Ryan. I'm missing a bunch of them, but somebody once asked me if I was Alan Cumming, and I was gravely
So Martha's Vineyard is like the posh version of the island in Midnight Mass.
Correct. We are. Yes.
Gotcha.
We're posh and we have sharks.
Well, we'll find out where you are next time on your globe-trotting adventures.
And next time could be any time. Depends. If I join the League of Temporal, whatever the fuck they're called.
Well, you know what? I think we've actually managed to record part 1 and part 2 in fairly quick succession. So maybe we should try and jump on that and record part 3 before long.
Anytime.
As well. Well, as it happens, my schedule has come a little bit free in the next couple of weeks, so I'll get back to you with a date. But in the meantime, thank you so much. All
right. And regards to Phil, and as ever, it's a great pleasure to be on the show. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to Robert for taking the time to join me from his other island lair. As we've said before, Robert's 2016 book, Haiku 61 Revisited, The Songs of Bob Dylan Interpreted as Haiku, and his 2021 novel, The History Student, are available now, and will keep you posted as to the progress of his next novel. In other news, Rolling in the Ruins, our 2 days of Moorcock-inspired RPGs here in Bradford, continues to gather pace. The dates of June 6th and June 20th are set, the venue is booked, the event is set up on Warhorn, and GM scenarios are being uploaded, and registrations are open. See breakfastintheruins.com for more information. There's a dedicated Rolling in the Ruins page there. But in the meantime, thanks as ever to our glorious patrons. First, those without tier, Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster, and Sebastian Weetabix. And to our Chaos Engineers, Andrew Clark, Adam Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Ben Hagar, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave F., Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner-Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Michael Hopwood, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Rex Osius Nusquam, Roger McCarthy, Scott Butler, Simon Perrins, Steve Braun, and Steve Luke. And of course, thanks to our crafty Jugaderos, Adrian Stott, Adrian Tchaikovsky, Alexander Harris, Andrew Van Ness, Kathy Rhubarb, Chris Sharp, Christian Hundell, James Connell, Graham Holden, James Knight, Kevin Williams, Liam Turner, Lorne Hugo, Loz, Mark Buckley, Mark Hewlett, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Murray Palmer, Nick Hopkinson, Ofer Ziv, Ritzby Skits, Sean Twist, Toby White, and Turner Lavery. And eternal thanks to our patron demons: Action Edmonds, Alistair Davison, Andy Darby, Brian Henderson, David Lee, Derek Clunan, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Jenny Stim, Jason Vogel, Jem Gilbert, Joachim Sund, Joe Monty, Johan Hiarper, Jonathan Sharp, Lee Gary, Liam Jones, Marius Latauskas, Mark Hebden, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tone Malazzo, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last, but of course never least, Robert Macmillan. Enough from me. Don't forget you can follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. We've got our Patreon page too, of course, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. But until next time, wherever you are in the world and whatever's going on in your turf, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.